Imagine you're building a Flutterflow app. The UI looks great, but you hit a wall. You need to send an SMS through Twilio, or pull structured content from Airtable, or even generate a checkout link in Stripe on the fly. Normally, that means juggling docs, copying snippets, and praying the integrations work. But what if I told you there is a super easy way of doing it that is just going to absolutely blow your mind? Yes, you can do all of that using Claude and something called MCP servers. And that means you can tie Twilio API, your Airtable schema, and even your Supabase database if you want, not to mention Stripe and pretty much any other integration that you can think of. Well, in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how you can easily create custom functions, custom actions, and custom widgets using Claude that work with your data and not against it. So first, I want to show you this Flutterflow app that I built that showcases how you can easily get access to external systems a lot easier than you would be doing it right now the traditional way, okay? So here we are in Flutterflow, and I have here a very, very simple app that accesses my Supabase database, as well as accesses like Stripe products, and even generates a buy now links as well, which is fairly complex to do the traditional way. So I'm going to go ahead and run this app and show you exactly what's happening. And then I'm going to show you step by step how I did all of that so that you can do that as well. All right, so here's our very, very simple app just to show you how you can easily do all of these integrations, okay? So on this page here, okay, we have two pages. And on this page, we are accessing our database data, okay? So I have a to-do table, and here I have two to-do items, okay? And I can toggle them and do all that. And so if we go into my Supabase database, you can see I have a to-do, and I have two to-do items. And right now they're marked false, which is why they're not checked. So I'm going to go ahead and check them here, and they're going to be marked true as well here. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this, and you should see them marked true here, okay? Now, you may be thinking at this point, well, James, this is fairly easy to do, right? This is built into Flutterflow. Well, yes, this method, this integration is actually built into Flutterflow, but Flutterflow does not support all integrations, right? So I want to show you how you can do this. And I also want to show you how you can do Stripe, which is a lot more complex, okay? And so if we go to the second page, we have here Stripe products, okay? So if you're not familiar with Stripe, Stripe is a very, very easy to use payment processor, right? So if you want to sell stuff online, you want to accept money, you want to sell services, products, etc., chances are you're going to be using something like Stripe, right? And with Stripe within the dashboard, you can create products and do all kinds of interesting things. So right here, I have two products that I have created, okay? And this is the price. And I also have a payment link, right? So if you click over here, that's going to redirect to an actual payment link here, right? Where you can fill all of these things out and hopefully purchase the product or service here, okay? And, you know, you can click here and you can display all kinds of data. And this is actually very, very complex to do in Flutterflow, right? Flutterflow has some level of integration with Stripe. It's not by any means a complete type of integration, right? Some level of integration, but it's not flexible. It doesn't allow you to do anything that you want to do, right? Well, fortunately, using this method, by using Claude MCP integration method, you can easily do all of that, right? So let me jump back into my Flutterflow app here, and let me show you how all of this is done, okay? So all of this is not done using, Flutterflow integrations. This is all done using custom functions, custom actions, custom widgets. In this case, this is done using custom actions. Okay, so I basically have code that I had Claude write with the help of MCP, right? Super, super important. That's the keyword right there. And so with this help of these MCP servers, Claude was able to figure out what kind of data I have, like what tables I have, what kind of data I have, what kind of products I have in Stripe, how much these products cost, how much am I selling them for, are these archive products, are these active products? All of that was easily done using MCP servers. So this is the end result, right? So now we have all of these custom actions here, right? So what I'm doing is, basically, when you load the page, I run this custom action, right? So here we have it. And I'm basically running this custom action. This custom action actually connects to this external service, right? Supabase Stripe, etc., etc. It gets the data, it sets a page state variable, and then this page state variable changes, right? And this triggers this update here, right? And as a result, you see all that data here, okay? And so all of this is done using custom actions. Now, you may be thinking to yourself at this point, well, great, but how do you write those custom actions? Well, I'm really, really glad you asked, because that's the key here, right? All of this was done with one shot, just by telling Claude to do it, no changes, nothing. All of this was done with one shot, okay? And before we jump into Claude and I show you how to get this MCP servers working and all of that, and actually generate these custom actions that you can use with Flutterflow, let me quickly explain to you why this method is so powerful, okay? Because it took me a while to kind of understand it. So I want to make sure you understand it as well. And so let me show you an important diagram that kind of explains how everything works, right? So in this Claude Code regular flow, and by the way, I really like Claude Code. It's amazing. I've been using it a lot lately, and it works really, really well for Flutterflow apps and non-Flutterflow apps. Doesn't really matter. So in this regular flow, we use Claude CLI, right, which is this command line interface, and it's an LLM, right? It's an interface to this LLM, and we basically tell it, generate a function that does this, generate a function that does that. And that works really well. But the issue that we have is that it doesn't have access to our data, right? If you want to create a function that works specifically with your data, you can't really use this because it doesn't have access to your data, right? If you want to create a function that iterates over, records in your database, or iterates over products in your Stripe account, or over records in an Airtable, it's not going to work, right? You need to give access. You need to give it access in kind of this standard way, right? And this is where MCP comes in, okay? So this is our Claude Code MCP flow, okay? What we are basically doing is we first give Claude an access to our data, right? Whether it's Supabase, Stripe, Airtable, you name it. But we don't give it access directly. We give it access via an MCP server. So what is an MCP server? Well, there's a lot of definitions of exactly what it is, but let me give you a really simple one. Essentially, it's a server that tells Claude all the different ways that we can work with that data. For instance, when it comes to something like Supabase, a Supabase MCP server essentially gives it a bunch of functions or a bunch of tools, and one could be something like, give us a list of tables, or give us a list of functions, edge functions, or execute this edge function. And that's pretty much it. It's very, very simple. And so it can query one of those tools, such as give us a list of tables, and it can see all the tables that we have. And once Claude knows the tables that we have, the schema, right? That could be another tool. Give us the schema for the table. It can create SQL, right? It can generate SQL. It can update. It knows how to do all that. The problem is it just didn't have access to our specific data. And this is where MCP comes in, because it's able to do it in kind of this standardized way, okay? So if you Google for Model Context Protocol, which is what MCP is, you can end up on one of these pages here. This is Claude Anthropic's kind of main documentation page where you can kind of read about it. And also, if you Google for something like Supabase MCP, you're going to, end up on this page right here. And this is Model Context Protocol, right? Connect your AI tools to Supabase using MCP. And you can kind of learn more about it, right? And the same thing for Stripe, right? Just type Stripe MCP. You're going to find a page that looks something like this. Model Context Protocol for Stripe. And this lets your AI agents interact with Stripe API by using our MCP server, right? And this is truly amazing, right? Because it allows us to work with our own specific data in a programmatic, agentic way, right? This is very, very important to understand. And so going back to this diagram, right? Instead of just, dealing with Claude in kind of this generic way, we can have Claude work with our data, okay? We can say, Claude, get me all the products from Stripe. And Claude has access to the Stripe MCP with our, keys, so it can access our Stripe instance, not somebody else's, and it can get all the products. And then, and this is the important part, right? It's not only about getting the data, right? We can ask Claude to write a function to list all the products, or a function to get all, the products buy now links, right? That's the key, right? The first part is actually accessing the data, but we can get Claude to write specific code that's tailored for our data, right? Which is very, very important. And so just like how I said earlier, you're not just limited to Stripe MCP or Supabase MCP. You have tons and tons of other MCP servers that you can give access to Claude, and then it can work with your own specific data using this kind of, this standard interface, if you will, right? Which is truly amazing, okay? And so this is what I used to generate the code that you saw in Flutterflow, right? And so how exactly did I do that? Well, here's my Claude instance, right? I'm just going to type Claude over here, and I'm using Claude Code, which you can access via the CLI, okay? And so if I type MCP here, you can see that I have two MCP servers here. And how exactly do I set them up? Well, if you go back to the documentation, you can see that it's basically telling you a command line that you can run. So for instance, for Claude Code, or if you're using Cursor, Visual Studio Code, you name it. So I'm using Claude Code. I just have to execute this line over here, okay? And that's going to connect with my Stripe account. It's going to do the whole process and connect. So once we run this in your terminal, it's going to add it, and it's going to authenticate. And so that is why you see it here. You see Stripe is connected. And so if I type on Stripe, you can see inside of Stripe, we're connected, we're authenticated. And actually, I'm using my test environment, right? With Stripe, you have production and test. And you can now create like multiple sandboxes as well. What you want to do is you want to start first testing in your test environment, okay? And so this MCP server only has access to my test environment. It doesn't have access to my production environment because I'm testing right now, okay? And so here you can, you can choose view tools, re-authenticate, clear authentication, and reconnect. So if I do view tools, I can see all the different tools, all the different ways of getting different data, right? So for instance, search Stripe documentation, get Stripe account info, create customer, list customers, create products, list products, create price, list, etc., etc. Look how many are there, right? 25 tools that Claude has access to. And you can think of these tools as API endpoints, right? Traditionally, you would need to create a different API endpoint for each of these tools, right? So can you imagine having possible 25 API endpoints? I mean, you're not going to have 25, but you may have 10, you may have 7, you may have 15, right? Depending on how much of the functionality you're using. But here, you don't need to do all that. You can have Claude do it intelligently, okay? So I'm going to press escape. I'm going to press escape out, and I'm going to press escape. And so now Claude has access to my Supabase and my Stripe. So I can say something like, tell me all the products in my Stripe account that I have configured that are active, right? Because you can mark some products as archive. You can archive them if you're not using them anymore. And so I'm going to do this, and Claude has access to my Stripe account. So it's going to, fetch it. I'll fetch all the active products from his Stripe account. So it's going to execute, all the API calls, all the API stuff it needs to do, which is what it's doing kind of in the back end, right behind the scenes. And that's what it's doing. So it's telling me you have 2 active products in your Stripe account, 60-minute consultation, 30-minute consultation. So let's go ahead and see if that's actually true. So I'm going to jump into my Stripe account. I'm using test data, and I'm going to go into my product catalog. And I'm going to see, and guess what? I see these 2 products. Now I have 25 archive products, but I have 2 active products. And that is exactly what Stripe is telling me. Now, I can go further. I can ask, Claude to give me the prices, right? Because that could be another API call, right? So I can say like, now tell me the prices for each of the 2 active products, okay? And so we have the prices right here, and let's go ahead and see if it's able to do it. I'll fetch the prices for both active products. And so it has access to this tool called list prices, and it's going to get the ID of that product. And here it is, 60-minute consultation, 200, 100. And so it's able to get the data that's external, right? The data that I have given it access to by installing and configuring this MCP server, okay? And this is amazing, right? But we're not done yet, right? The real value here is not just, by asking Claude, although that is very, very powerful, right? You can just chat with it and get, all kinds of data, right? All kinds of analytics if you want, like what were my sales last month, last week, whatever. But in my view, the real value is that you can ask Claude to write you code that you can use in your apps, right? Because you're using this MCP in this development phase, right? Your apps are not going to be using this MCP server, right? Your apps are going to have code that's going to be custom tailored for your specific use case. So for instance, I can say, write a Flutterflow action, custom action, lists all the active Stripe products. Okay, so something like this. Okay, and let's see what it comes up. So it's telling us, I'll write a Flutterflow custom action that lists all the active Stripe products. This will use the Stripe API to fetch the products. Okay, so it's working. Let's give it a moment. Okay, so it wants to create this right here. But this is essentially what it just wrote, right? List active Stripe products is basically creating a file, and it has all of this here. And that is exactly what I did, right? But I worked slightly differently, right? What you want to do is, before you ask Claude to write this function, you want to go into Flutterflow and you want to go ahead and create it, right? So for instance, if I go over here and I create this custom action, and I say list all Stripe products. I also want to configure it, right? So if I press here, that's going to go ahead and create the boilerplate. But it's very, very important to configure the return value and the define arguments. So for arguments, we don't have any arguments, right? In this case, we're not searching for anything specific. We just want to output all of them. So I'm going to leave arguments as is, no arguments. But we definitely want to have a return value because we're returning the product. And for the return value, I recommend that you guys just use JSON. You just use isList as JSON, because JSON is a very, very flexible data type. It can have, all kinds of data, pretty much any data, right? And because we don't know ahead of time how this data is going to look, just use JSON. Okay, so I select this, click here, and now I have a kind of this template that I can simply copy, go back to Claude, escape, up arrow, and then I can go back, I can go to the end here, and I can say use the following template. And Claude will understand, and Claude also has access to our Stripe data, and so it'll be able to write a function that gives us all the data from our Stripe account. That is exactly what I did. So if we go to Visual Studio Code, I like to run my Claude as a tab in Visual Studio Code. That way I can see on this left-hand side the code that it's generating. So here we have get product Stripe. And so I've given it my Stripe secret key, right? It needs it to access it. But other than that, it knows, my data. It knows what products are going to have. It knows everything it's going to have. And also we can test it. We can say, hey, Claude, test out this code. Does it work? Is it getting the products? Claude can do all that. And as a result, we have this piece of code that we know it works because Claude tested it, basically created a file that ran it in the background, right? And it tested it. It got the products, right? As you can see, problem solved. It's fixing a bunch of things. And now it's listing it. It's actually giving me, it's telling me both links return HTTP 200 should work properly, right? So now all you need to do is copy this, go back to Flutterflow, right? And paste it into your function, right? So in this case, it's called get products, and I called it something else because this is for this right here. So I'm going to go ahead and discard all this. And this is the end result, right? All of this was written by Claude with the MCP server. What's cool about this is that, the Stripe API is rather complex. It's kind of cumbersome, right? You can get your products, you can get pricing, all of that. But if you want to get like buy links, it's in, you need to execute another REST API endpoint, right? And Claude can do all of that, right? So essentially you tell it, hey, I want to get, the product names, the product prices, and the buy link, and it will go ahead and generate all that and give you a custom function that outputs exactly that, right? So if you go back to Flutterflow, you scroll down, you can see that all the products, in this case, we have 2 products, but all your products are going to have these fields: ID, name, description, active, all of this, right? So you are essentially having everything: primary price ID, buy link URL. And that is why when we run it, we actually have these URLs that work, right? So as you can see, it all works. right? We can choose a currency, you can pay in a currency, etc., and you can just fill all of this out. And this is very, very complex to do without all this, without an MCP server, right? Because you need to, you need to go ahead and see what kind of data you have, and you need to kind of tweak it to make sure that it's getting the right data, it's getting all of that. But with Claude, you can do it all automatically, okay? And so as a result, I have these get to dos, which is simply working with our table, and Claude knows it knows what data, what fields my table has, right? So it's saying from to do, we're using select, which means select all of them. But it knows that, okay, so I have a created add field, right? So if I go back here, I have a created add field, and Claude knows about it, and it's basically ascending it. It's sorting it by descending, right? Ascending falls. If we didn't have this MCP server, it would not know that there's a field called created add. It would not know that there's a table called to do, right? And we can all do that programmatically. We don't need to configure Supabase in Flutterflow. We don't need to do all that. We can do all of this here programmatically. And same thing for Stripe. Like if I go over here, if I go into Stripe, I don't have Stripe configured here, right? I don't need to configure it, right? I have a custom action that basically does all that and more. It's a lot more flexible. It's like 10 times more, 100 times more flexible than this built-in integration. And you can do this for anything, right? Airtable, if you need to connect to Airtable, you need to connect to Twilio, you need to connect to anything else. Chances are there's an MCP server available that you can do it. And once you have MCP configured, right? So if you click MCP, you can manage your MCP servers, right? So if I type MCP, you can see that I have two servers. They're connected. I can view details. I can see my Supabase is connected here. These are the arguments. And I'm basically following instructions, right? So I can view tools. And as you can see, list tables, list extensions, list migrations. It's just all the necessary tools that we need to access our data, right? Execute SQL, search documentation, everything that you need, right? Just to understand how your Supabase works, right? Because once Claude knows the tables, it can get the schema, right? And it can figure out everything that it needs to know, and it can write the code that works for your specific use case. And so this is an amazing way to integrate your Flutterflow app with external services, right? Especially the Stripe example, it would be rather complex to do manually, right? It would be a hassle to do manually. But by using Claude MCP functionality, and this could be Claude Code, could be Cursor, could be any other agentic LLM that you may be using as an AI assistant. And if it supports MCP, great. Then you can simply connect it to your MCP of choice, configure them, and it'll be able to generate the code that you can use in your apps. Okay, so super, super amazing method. And so let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Definitely join our amazing Patreon community, because I'm going to be making this app available, as well as all the resources used in this video. They're going to be there on our amazing Patreon community. And remember, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you first join an amazing community where you can get help, support, regardless of what kind of problems that you may be working on. And of course, you also gain access to all my previous apps, as well as all my future apps. If you're serious about NoCode, if you're serious about building amazing apps with Flutterflow or other services, other tools, then you definitely want to join our amazing Patreon community. And you can do just that by clicking the first link in the description below the video.